There are moments in history when silence speaks louder than any gunfire, when a single voice, calm yet unyielding, shatters the very structure of command. It happened on a cold, wind-swept morning at Fort Leighton, a base known for its iron discipline and even harder men. Among the ranks stood recruit Daniel Kearns, a name barely known, a face lost in formation. He was 21, quiet, deliberate, the kind who listened more than he spoke. His captain, Marcus Hale, was the opposite, decorated, fierce, and feared, a man who had mistaken obedience for power. To him, command was not about leadership, but domination. Soldiers obeyed not because they respected him, but because they feared the price of hesitation. Hale's voice carried across the base like the crack of a rifle, his temper a weapon sharper than any blade. His men learned early, compliance meant survival. That morning, frost still clinging to the barracks' roofs, the inspection began. Boots struck the ground in unison, breath steaming in the cold air. Hale's eyes swept the line, hunting for weakness, for fault, for something to remind the men that perfection was expected and mercy was not. When a quartermaster reported that rations were missing, it was enough to ignite his fury. "Someone's stealing from the unit," he barked. "And if I don't get the truth, I'll make an example of one of you." His glare fixed on Daniel Kearns. "Step forward. You'll confess before the unit." Right now, the world seemed to still. A gust of wind stirred dust around their boots. No one moved. No one dared to breathe. Kearns didn't step forward. He didn't lower his head or speak in protest. He simply remained motionless, standing at attention, his eyes calm but resolute. The captain's voice grew harder. "You heard me, recruit. Step forward." Kearns' reply came after a heartbeat of silence. "Sir, I can't confess to what I haven't done." His tone was respectful but unshaken, his words quiet enough to force those nearby to lean in. Hale's face tightened. "You think you can question my orders?" He took a step closer, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. The lines of soldiers remained frozen, torn between fear and awe. Hale towered over the young man, his medals gleaming, his authority absolute. Or so he thought. "I gave you an order," Hale said again, his voice low and dangerous. Kearns met his eyes. "An order without honor isn't worth obeying, sir." The words struck the air like a shot. A murmur rippled through the ranks, faint but unmistakable. Hale's jaw twitched, his fury rising. He lunged forward, gripping Kearns by the collar, dragging him an inch closer until their faces nearly met. "You're one word away from ending your career." Kearns' voice didn't tremble. "Sir, leadership isn't proven by fear. It's proven by truth." The silence that followed was unbearable. Even the wind seemed to die. Hale's hand fell away. The man who had ruled through shouting stood motionless, his authority dissolving before the eyes of his entire command. The ranks behind Kearns remained unmoving, hundreds of soldiers witnessing a quiet collapse. No gunfire, no violence, only a sentence that broke the old order. Minutes passed before Hale turned away, his face pale. He looked to the colonel standing a few paces back, searching for rescue. "Sir, you heard him. That's insubordination." His voice cracked, half outrage, half desperation. The colonel's eyes stayed on Kearns. His tone was even, deliberate. "What I heard," he said, "was integrity. Something this base has been short on." Hale opened his mouth, then closed it. Around him, the soldiers stood silent, their expressions unreadable. No one dared to smirk. No one dared to cheer. The air carried only the weight of realization. The captain's authority had not been challenged by rebellion. It had been undone by truth. Kearns straightened his collar and saluted. "Permission to return to formation, sir." The colonel nodded. "Granted." Kearns stepped back into line. The soldiers around him shifted subtly, as though gravity itself had changed. It was not rebellion that moved them, but respect. For years they had followed orders without question, taught that obedience was survival. But that morning, they saw something different. The line between loyalty and blind submission drawn by a single man's courage. Hale stood frozen, his rage cooling into shame. He turned, his shoulders heavy, and walked away. The colonel watched him go, his expression unreadable. Then he looked back at the recruits and said quietly, "Let that be the lesson. Strength without honor is weakness in disguise." Later that day, the incident was quietly erased from official reports. There was no mention of insubordination, no charge against Kearns. The only record that remained was a single note in the colonel's hand. Matter resolved, conduct exemplary. But paper couldn't contain what had happened. Word spread faster than rumor, carried through every corner of the base. Soldiers whispered about the recruit who spoke truth to power, the man who stood still when fear demanded obedience. The story took on the shape of a legend before the week was over. That night, Hale packed his things. By morning, he was gone, reassigned to an administrative post far from command. Some said he requested the transfer. Others believed it was ordered. Either way, the man who had built his reign on fear left behind an army that no longer trembled in his absence. As the sun rose over Fort Leighton the next day, the air felt different. There was no cheer, no rebellion, no grand declaration, only the quiet dignity of men who had remembered why they wore the uniform. They trained with purpose, not fear. They followed commands, but now with eyes open. Daniel Kearns remained in the ranks, saying little. When spoken to, he answered with respect. When praised, he nodded and changed the subject. But to those who served with him, he became a quiet symbol of something larger, the reminder that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it stands silent, refusing to bend. Years passed. Fort Leighton changed. New captains, new faces, new wars. But the story of Daniel Kearns endured. Recruits spoke of the inspection day, when one sentence froze the entire base. Veterans told it to newcomers not as rebellion, but as a lesson. They said Kearns never sought promotion, never asked for recognition. He finished his service quietly, decorated by officers who once outranked him. One evening, before his discharge, a young lieutenant approached him during mess. "Sir," he asked, "why did you speak up that morning? You could have lost everything." Kearns looked at the young man for a long moment before answering. "Because silence," he said, "is loyalty to the wrong man, when truth is on the line." The lieutenant never forgot those words. Neither did anyone else who heard them. Years later, they were engraved beneath the memorial wall at Fort Leighton, carved in steel beside the names of the fallen. Leadership demands courage, but so does saying no. Visitors to the base still stop to read that inscription. Some know the story, most don't, but they can feel its weight. It's the kind of truth that doesn't fade. Daniel Kearns' name never made headlines, but his act became part of the base's spirit. A quiet standard whispered in training halls and repeated in the field. Leaders cited it when Remen class fighting their men what real command meant. Recruits studied it as a lesson in honor. And so the legend lived on, not in glory, not in rebellion, but in integrity. It became the unspoken law of Fort Leighton, that strength without conscience is hollow, and obedience without honor is slavery. Because one young man standing in the cold morning wind chose silence over submission and truth over comfort. And in doing so, he reminded an entire army that real leadership doesn't demand obedience, it earns it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories from Classified Courage.